A new survey about the cybersecurity landscape suggests that for many businesses and end users, there is not a lot of positive news. With the rise of generative AI technologies, life will get even harder for security pros and end users. We're going to talk about these challenges on this episode of Today in Tech. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Joining me on the show today is Brandon Traffansted. He is a field CTO at CyberArk. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Hey, Keith. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Field CTO. What does that mean? What do you do there?
So primarily, our group is responsible for making sure that the stuff that CyberArk is building from a technical strategy perspective actually lines up with driving positive risk reduction for our customers and not just stuff we think is a good idea. So I get the benefit of talking about what we're doing, but also potentially chasing our product teams to make sure it's right on point with what our customers are expecting.
All right, great. Let's jump into the survey that you guys did, because this is fascinating results, and so I want to go through a bunch of them, and then our themes will develop once we're discussing this. The first one I wanted to ask was, you mentioned the rise of machine identities. Can you expand on kind of what these are, and explain why a lot of these machine identities are undersecured and overprivileged? What do those mean?
So machine identities as a concept is simply the lack of a human attached to an identity. In a more practical perspective, it is a script, a workload, a container, as an example. Any number of those hundreds of thousands of pipelines that are kicking off without any human intervention, right, that are making a lot of the services we use work. So simply a non-human identity.
Right. So an example, if I was accessing a server as a human, I would have a certain number of privileges and access rights and things like that. But if I wrote a script to automate some of these processes, the script becomes the machine identity. Is that right?
Exactly that. Now, there is a little bit of overlap in that scenario.
Yeah.
For instance, if you are sitting there running the script, chances are it's inheriting your identity. So it's kind of like a midpoint. So when we look at a lot of the overprivileging of machine identities, it's that one standard deviation away. So you might have robotic process automation that you use, vulnerability scanners, all that good stuff. The human is not there. Human built it, human deployed it, now it's doing its own thing. That's typically where we're going to center in as it relates to the machine identity, but also the risk, as well as the problems inherent to it that we'll probably chat a little bit more about.
And so what do you mean by then overprivileged? It just means that when someone's writing the script, we're being like, this machine, this script, they can do whatever they want. Like you're just letting them, you're giving them the fast lane access, you're giving them the TSA line. I think that was one of the examples we talked about in the pre-call, right?
Yep. So let's look at TSA as an example, right? You're going through airport security, you're probably grumpy. Maybe you're not. I don't know what listeners are into, but you're going in the TSA line, and then you see there's another line that's moving really, really fast. It could be the, where the flight attendants and pilots go through. It could be one of the clear lanes as an example, but you see people moving quickly with very little friction. That is what we're going to see in a lot of cases for these critical machine identities. And it's because of a couple different reasons that they have all of these rights. The first reason is typically security folks and the developers building don't want to interrupt the machine identity too much because it'll break something and they'll have to go back and refactor. But the other side of it is, by nature of not being a human, a machine only knows it works or it doesn't. So say you've built this super cool application, it's running in production and it doesn't have the permissions to do what it needs to do. It's not going to call you and be like, hey, Keith, I need more permissions. It's going to say, nope, failed. Now everything else is broken. Now somebody needs to go fix this some way. So it's trying to not interrupt business ops that tends to have a lot of those machines by default being super privileged, those sort of fast lane TSA traveler kind of deals.
Is there an issue of trust? Does the trust word come up? Because it's a machine, we can trust it that it's not going to do anything bad? Or is that where companies are getting in trouble because they're like, and hackers are picking up on this? Is that what you saw in the survey?
So it was reflected in the survey, but in general security practice, it tends to be a bit of a human nature thing. We're human, right? We relate to one another as people. I know exactly how much I can trust you before I need to validate, that kind of thing. Machines, if I've not had that background, right? If I just see SVC underscore 1127 executing out there, it's different than I am. So there's a certain human bias as well that tends to save applying least privilege to machines until after we focus on our humans. And it's not just if it's going to break. It's not just because I'm scared of the developers. Sometimes it can just be human nature.
Yeah. So how do you reduce the privilege for a machine identity without, like you were saying, like a lot of developers are thinking they're going to break the system. How can you reduce the privileges so that you know that it won't be taken advantage of?
There are a couple of themes on how to get this done.
Yeah.
What we've seen be successful in the long term is, and you've probably seen the term floating around, security by design. So if an app or a process is being built, having security being there saying, all right, like how exactly does this thing need to execute? What permissions does it need? Does it need full powerful access to the cloud or only like 5 services?
Yeah.
If we do it by design, well, now we have less uh-ohs later on down the line. If it's not something that's being built in time, right? So you've got applications running that are overprivileged that have been out there for years. What we've found is, number one, targeting highly visible applications, the ones that your leadership is concerned about from a security perspective, but also an availability standpoint. Stands to reason that doing an assessment, performing an audit of these makes good sense for your business. Second one is, regardless of what you use, follow the integrations. Many automation tools, as an example, CI/CD tools, they recognize that overprivileging and hard-coded secrets were an issue. So they integrated with folks out there that manage it. Chances are you have one of those things. You follow the integrations, you get value quicker.
Yeah.
And positive news spreads. And then the third one is another one of those vastly human pieces. If you work with a team of developers that you like, you go out, you have lunch, whatever it may be, start there. Chances are you've already built up some trust, so you'll get a lot less friction. But the bottom line is, when we have these applications, applying the principle of least privilege works exactly as if you would apply it to a human. It's at a different scale and likely has a lot more, for lack of a better way to describe it, baggage associated.
Right,
but it's the same movement.
So is this something that a lot of companies can quickly update their systems, or is this going to be a major project for most security teams?
If you've got stuff that you've built yourself, right? So a lot of your code has been self-built. It tends to be a little bit more effort, but there is light at the end of the tunnel here, because I would imagine, and this is just a guess, but I would imagine that many of your organizations are in some process of migrating that app. Maybe it's to the cloud, maybe it's miniaturizing and making it more microservices based. This migration is an impetus for something like least privilege or security assessment. So if you built your own stuff, there's a little bit more of a path to cross, but migration really does be a good sort of impetus to change. If you're using off-the-shelf apps, your Jenkins, your Terraform, your Ansible, the RPA stuff that I mentioned, those a lot quicker. And that those integration paths I talked about, I kid you not, in a lot of cases, it's a drop down that says, don't use this hard-coded secret. Or even if you're looking at the cloud in particular, there are tools built right into what you use that say, hey, this identity that's been operating for the past 6 months only used these 4 permissions, and yet you have it permissioned for 1,400 permissions.
Right.
Maybe dial that back. So if it's something that you built native, or if it's something that you're getting off the shelf, you're going to have an easier go of it, but consistency is key. So you do have to target both those sides of the coin. You can't just focus on the stuff that you didn't build. Right.
There's another thing in the survey that said 61% reported that a privileged user was human only. And so it was confusing to me as like, should that number be higher, where 100% of the privileges are given to humans, or does that break the system where where do you see that 61%? Should that be higher or lower?
This statistic, it broke my heart a little bit, but it also brought me joy in that I tend to like to watch the dumpster as it's a light on fire. But in this particular statistic, we asked, do you define a privileged user as human or both human and machine? And 61% of the organizations we talked to said, oh yeah, we only have a definition for a powerful user for humans. So there is no definition inside of their lexicon that states these applications are privileged in some way. So the number in the ideal state should go down. We should have organizations saying, no.
Privileged user means both.
For human power, non-human power as well. So this tells us, at least from these statistics, that machines tend to be sort of, they're pushed off, wait till later, let's focus on the humans as an example. And by the way, when we talk about privileged access, I recognize that term has sort of been shifting. Every organization thinks of it a bit differently. So in this particular report, and just in general, when we look at powerful access or privileged access, it's any level of access that if it were compromised by a threat actor, would at the very least give you a stomach ache, right? Yeah. Would cause downtime, would cause critical data to be leaked. The fact that so many organizations said it's only a human thing, and the fact that we've got all those pipelines running and 45 machine identities to every human is a point of concern. Yeah.
All right, there were a lot, this is a survey around the whole threat landscape, so we're not just going to be talking about the kind of the humans and the machine stuff here.
Even though it is my favorite topic, so I appreciate you starting with it, man.
That's why I led with it. So another area of concern was the lack of focus on the vendor risk management side. For example, I think 84% of your respondents said that they have 3 or more cloud service providers. You then also saw an 89% increase in the number of SaaS applications, software as a service. This leads me to think that there would basically be a rise in the number of third or fourth party attacks. So are we now in a state when we look at the security landscape where most hackers are basically getting in through the back door through these methods rather than trying to attack the company itself? They're getting in through these third party apps, whether it's cloud services or other SaaS applications. Yeah, true or false?
True. It's another avenue that is incredibly valid. And admittedly, right, think back some of the highest profile breaches we've seen over the last couple of decades. I imagine there are more than a few that started because a third party vendor was compromised, and rightfully so. In a lot of cases, as an attacker, and I'll put myself kind of in those shoes, if I'm looking at something like maybe a SaaS app as an example, or looking at a cloud console, in a lot of cases, I can execute that attack without necessarily having to worry about gaining some sort of implicit network trust. I can do it from my house. In a lot of cases, depending on your environment, I can even get a lot done with simple access to the public internet. So if you take that lack of implicit network trust, apply that to, in a lot of cases, some softened requirements around vendor assessment and security, you have an uptick in some of the concerns that we're seeing here. There is one thing that you'll note in sort of the survey that we called out, the idea of a third party and a fourth party.
Right.
And I recognize we could keep going down the path, right? Your vendors. But in this case,
the eighth party attack, right?
Exactly that. I just taken it to call it, it's the nth party, right? At some point, the chain tends to stop. But for the third parties, that's kind of what we're talking about here. The fourth party element, to me, was the most interesting part here. And when we say fourth party, primarily, we're looking at something like one of these SaaS vendors, right? CRMs, as an example, are a great way to gain a lot of intel for very little time with a lot of privileges for an organization, but also your cloud service providers too. So the most common fourth party I'm going to see is anyone you're operating from a CSP, that's your third party, or anyone that I, as a vendor, would be operating. So if I host my stuff in AWS, that then becomes a fourth party vendor for you if you're the customer. The reason that we keyed in here on the multi-cloud is that in, I'd say, the mid 2010s, there was a ton of brand loyalty for cloud, right? I use AWS, that's the one I use. Never shall we ever use these other two. But then your data analytics team came up and they were like, hey man, got this G Cloud thing. And then your productivity team said, well, we actually use a lot of stuff in Azure. And before you know it, bam, you now have 3 clouds.
Right.
Question is, do your policies map? Have you done a lot of scrutiny with your main cloud? And your secondary and tertiary cloud have less controls or overprivileging. So that's kind of the interesting part. The lack of brand loyalty has created this almost need to assess, number one, the security you put into your third parties and we put into your fourth parties.
Right.
But also then tying back to vendors in general, the third parties, we saw as a software vendor, CyberArk saw a huge uptick post-pandemic in not just taking our word for our security practices.
Yeah, that leads me to my next question is like, what are the companies that are doing this if they're seeing a lot of third-party clouds? You know, they've got 3 or more cloud service providers that they're using. They've got 30 different applications, and I'm being real generous there on the third and the fourth party. So what are they not doing? Are they just not asking the vendor for, prove to me that you can secure my data? Are they being, the vendors just going, oh, trust me, and the companies are going, okay, like what's going on here? What are they not doing?
So for the longest time, the golden ticket was SOC 2. Hey, vendor, you got SOC 2, You're good to go. I trust you. However, it doesn't take into account things like vendor security practices, the security of vendor endpoint, that network ingress and egress that I talked about. So what this has turned into for successful organizations has, and I hate to say it, but it has been more vendor scrutiny in the form of more consistent vendor audits or making vendor relations a part of risk versus a part of, whatever security practice that you may be going through. So at least from our perspective, we're getting asked far more questions about custodianship of data, right? Where the data is located, what external parties might have access to it, our utilization of AI, which I think we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
Admittedly, on one hand, it creates more work for everybody. On the other hand, it's refreshing to see that we're being asked these questions, whereas 10 years, get the SOC 2, you're kind of good to go. So increase in vendor scrutiny here.
So they're not just checking a box off on their list, right? They're not just going check. Or, exactly. I think when I was designing a lot of buyer's guides around security, I'd be like, okay, this vendor says that they've got 128-bit security. Okay, check. Like you're seeing companies do more than just the checkbox.
Oh yeah, prove it. Right. I think one of the most common things that we've seen is how compliance, while great, does not equal security or risk reduction, practicing what you preach, so to speak. So to your point, whereas we would get a question like, hey, do you have hierarchical encryption? Yep, done. These days, it's prove it.
Yeah.
So admittedly, it means we can get really nerdy about it. But on the offside, it means if your team is already pretty slim and you're doing vendor assurance, a lot of folks are beginning to bring in third parties and independent review to help out. So it's created almost this extra subset of vendors helping you to certify and define your vendors, and then more parties come down the mix.
I have a note written on my notes from our pre-call that said, you had an example from Chipotle. Was this an analogy, or were you just going off track in our meeting?
No. It was an analogy.
Okay.
So when we think about this trust of vendors or vendor assessment, I like to think about it as going to Chipotle or Moe's or Willie's or Qdoba or whichever one.
Yeah.
Like any place that lets you see the food being prepared.
Okay.
A couple of options. Your first option is to just trust that what you asked for, your perfect burrito, is going to be prepared exactly as you wanted it. So you'll turn around and then just let the food be made. How many of you actually would do that?
Right.
Like you'll do mobile order, stuff like that. But if you're there and you're looking, of course, like I want to make sure that I'm getting the amount of guac that I asked for. Very similar to the vendor assurance, right? Just watch the burrito be made. Ask questions about the burrito. Ask third parties what they think about the burrito. It's kind of silly, but
like you don't get to expand this really hungry analogy. When you go to Burger King, you don't watch them making your burger. You just trust that they're going to get your order right, and then half the time you go back because it's not, correct.
Exactly that. Only in this case, it's not going back around to the window. It's potentially seeing a third party compromise happen.
Right. So that's the idea that a security company would be like, okay, here you go. Here's everything that we do. And that's the whole prove it thing, right?
Exactly that.
All right. So you did mention generative AI, so it wouldn't be one of our shows if we didn't mention this topic. You're saying that it's already here and that, but have you seen examples where attacks were the result of a generative AI tool, and not just creating a better phishing email, because we're all recognizing that trick or tip is going to go away because you're not going to be able to find the spelling mistakes as much as you used to. Or is it creating, better attack code? Like, where have you seen Gen AI kind of creep into the security landscape?
Yeah. For us, from an attacker perspective, because on the defense side, right, every organization is looking at ways to implement, this was in our report too, to implement defensive strategy, leveraging some sort of machine intelligence. It's a good idea, and it actually translates pretty well to the attack side of things too. And my belief, this is a personal one, is that the use of machine intelligence is really great at taking a whole bunch of structured or unstructured stuff floating around in the ether and then structuring it, right? But after structuring, humans still do come in the mix to apply things like creativity, to A/B test as an example, to make unstructured decisions on that structured data. And from an attack perspective, that is what we're seeing. And now I know you downplayed, right, the perfect phishing email.
Yeah.
But it is something that if we look at that attacker A/B testing, trying to constantly test the effectivity of social engineering at scale, I mean, it's pretty cool. I'll give you a quick example of that before we dive into, I'd say some of the more, I'll call it modernized looks at the attack path of Gen AI. I happen, and this is not true, but I'll use it as an example, I happen in my email correspondence to overuse, let's say it's the ellipses, right? You have a lot of people you work with who will put that ... and you're like, what are you using it for? Say I overuse those in order to do breaks, right? It stands to reason that if you're able to gain access to my social media posts, which are out there on public, you can begin to emulate my style of overusing ellipses. If you send it to someone I work with, they're like, oh yeah, that's totally BT, because there are those ellipses where he could use a semicolon, a comma, or a period, but he's dots.
Yeah.
And again, it's a joking concept, but the power of that sort of last break in social engineering trust, phishing emails can really help there. Now, if we look at AI as a true augmentation of human intelligence, taking unstructured and making it structured, what we've not seen a lot of outside of the advances in something like polymorphic malware and ransomware, which have been around prior to AI, is we're seeing the possibility and proof of leveraging command and control to run campaigns tied to a next level of polymorphic ransomware as an example, or to help write pseudocode that allows for a lack of detection from your heuristic-based detection models. A quick call out, CyberArk has a part of our organization called CyberArk Labs. One of the cool things they do is make open source attack and defense tools. And they actually built one called Chatty Catty. Really, really great name, but it is a proof of concept for a CNC that then runs LLM, call it LM enriched attack processes. Keith, I'll give you a link to it afterwards if you want to share it. But
all right, that's your one plug, Brandon.
Yeah, we're not seeing it at scale, and it's free to everybody. Okay. Right? So you can use it, you can change it at your own risk. Please don't do bad things with it. Yeah. But we're not seeing that being used in the super high profile attacks yet. Yeah. However, this proof of concept was a way for us to start to get around how we could look at it, how it could work. So I'd recommend the same to you all.
All right. The discussion of where Gen AI would try to imitate you just from your writing abilities and your use of ellipses. I do the same thing. I'm guilty of using parentheses too much in my writing. And this leads me to the idea of the deepfake audio and deepfake video. What's your take on these potential? We've already seen a lot of examples in the news. Do you expect those to rise as well? And I've got some examples too, but what are you seeing out there from that? Are you seeing more and more attempts to not just go the email route, but also then audio, video, SMS type things or phone?
So deepfake video is all over the news, to your point. Admittedly, when we tend to look at the fact that it's an election year, all over the world, that becomes a larger concern. But when we look in the business context, deepfake audio is where we're seeing a lot of concern in organizations, simply because if we don't see someone's mannerisms, right, or if we're getting that call from an executive, right, that's very, very urgent, it tends to be a lot easier to allow ourselves to trust that approach. Same as with my overuse of ellipses. Typically, if I'm giving a presentation, and my team will tell you this, I have a particular verbal cadence, and even simple AI models have been able to generate off of 1 minute of recording of me a pretty darn convincing language model.
Yeah.
And again, it's based on cadence, things like that, things that the human mind tends to build in, bridge the gaps. It's one of the reasons why people sound like people over the phone. The brains actually will bridge it. So long story short, video.
Did you tell me that you tried this with your team, or was that could have been someone else?
No, it was me. So I tried it with my team. I started a presentation using the AI me, and nobody was concerned. I mean, I might have sounded like I had a little bit of a cold, but again, that cadence was pretty easy to match. And it was just based off of something like this, where they grabbed me, built it, and then applied it.
Yeah. Okay. So then you were saying with the video stuff, we're still, what's your opinion on that? Like, are we there yet, or is it easier to figure this out?
So the tech is getting better. It's the practicality of the applications of the tech. How often, as an example, would you expect to have some sort of recording of your CFO making some sort of shady business transaction with a whole bunch of criminal looking types wearing sunglasses and exchanging metal briefcases? And even if that were the case, what impact would it have to your day to day versus the last minute call from the CEO who can't get access to their stuff, so a breach in security policy needs to happen for you to keep your job?
Right. And I think that most business communication beyond just email back and forth or text messages would then be of the audio type. You would have a phone call. I don't see a lot of businesses using either the FaceTime method or face-to-face video. We do see a lot on Zoom, and I think that's how some of these people were tricked. Like, they tricked someone into, like, oh, we're going to jump on a Zoom call and go over the details, and only I don't even think anybody was real in that call, except for the victim. This was the Hong Kong case. So I don't see video phishing as much as important as audio phishing at this point, right? And that's what you're saying?
Yeah, agreed. And it's the Occam's razor principle too. Like, if I'm able to establish some sort of foothold or to gain some sort of negative reaction via audio, why would I pour in the additional time, resources, and research to do it via video? Right.
Now, within that space, do you see the types of people that might be going, like, where are the attackers going? You gave the example of the CEO and the CFO, and those are the big whales, so to speak, of they've got the biggest impact of money available to them. But we've talked on this show where what I'm more concerned about from my perspective is people trying to imitate me, and then either trying to get money from, my wife or my kids, or grandma calling up my kid and going, hey, I can't get in touch with your dad. Or actually, no, it would be the kids calling grandma and saying, hey, I'm stuck. I'm in jail. I can't reach mom or dad. Can you send me $500 so I can get out of jail? Over a phone call, right? Because that's how we communicate with most family members. Like, do you see that happening, or is it just so small potatoes in terms of the hack that it's much more profitable for them to go after a bigger whale like a CFO?
I think when we look at motivations, right, we have all sorts of different attackers, right? From our nation states to our smaller orgs to our lone wolves. Admittedly, the motivation behind an attacker is something that I think us security practitioners like to think, but unless we've been there, we're not quite sure. And I say that simply because there is a chance that, let's look at grandma as an example. There's a chance that before grandma retired, she was in charge of a very large organization, and because of that has gained some visibility. And that might not be her gig anymore, but one of the things that we tend to be able to do more effectively from an attacker standpoint outside of the business world is play deeper on, I'll say, the positive emotion side of things, right? At work, you get a call from your CFO, you're concerned that, oh my gosh, I'm am I going to get fired? Or maybe you're thinking, I'm going to get a raise. At home, it just becomes far closer to, I'll say, the real us outside of work. And for that type of approach, and Keith, I think you and I chatted on this, I think you do the same thing, just having some form of proof or trust that can be utilized, that you don't share, you don't put on public, don't go and post it on LinkedIn.
Right.
In terms of, how do I prove to you that I am me? It could be a story. It could be my childhood nickname, as an example. These are ways that we can help folks who are feeling that emotional pull to respond, to just think about that one thing that you would say that would prove it.
Yeah. I think we have code words and code phrases and little stories, and then even then I might just hang up and then just double check and call them back rather than receiving that phone call from an unknown number. All right, so we talked about fakes a lot, and there was another question in your survey that knocked me out for a loop, which was 70% of companies said that they are confident that their employees can ID fake content, and 70. So 7 out of 10 could identify it. That number should be lower in my perspective, because I think there are people that are being faked out. Is that number too optimistic?
Yeah. So I, like you, was completely shocked by this number, it being so high. So I did some research. I looked into it. As part of the question, we gave a couple of scenarios. One of them was a video-based deepfake. With video, I feel a little bit more confident that folks like, you know what, I can identify it because of what I said earlier, right? If it's like super sketch, if it's jerky, you can see it, right?
Yeah.
CCTV of your CFO making these business deals. I imagine, and then this is just a guess, right? We don't have numbers to prove it. Next year we'll change it. That if we split things out of video by audio, the audio number would go up a little bit. However, there is, I think, some optimism here in that in the survey, folks said that they are putting together programs that are uplifting and training their personnel, right? Folks don't know what to look for unless those of you who run security teams are telling them what they should look for, what signs there might be. So the optimism there that I think is super warranted outside of video, yes, will be more likely, is simply that folks are building programs in order to help identify these things. So I hope to see the number always go up, but I do think there was a lot of thought about video versus audio in that response.
Yep. Now, I know we've been talking about deep fakes and Gen AI because that's always the little shiny object that's out there, but when you look at the news, you see a lot of the fact that the big successful attacks that get publicity are the ones that are going after existing vulnerabilities or methods that should have been implemented sooner. I've got two examples. The United Healthcare attack. It turns out that there was a lack of multi-factor authentication on one of the servers. The MGM Resort one was social engineering through a help desk worker, and it was an audio phone call asking them to change the passwords through a third-party company. So, a company watching this, someone in the security field goes, well, why should I worry about these shiny objects like Gen AI when, it's really, if I just had enough money to secure my existing infrastructure, like shouldn't companies worry more about their existing stuff to fix those holes that they've known about for 2 or 3 years, right?
Cool stuff is cool. Shiny stuff is shiny. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of us got into the security business is because we get to deal with all different types of technology spanning 70 years of technical disparity. It's cool. What that means, though, to your point, is that a lot of the original avenues in this 7-lane mega highway we've built still exist back from when it was a 2-lane road. You can still get purpose using the tried and true attack method that's existed in the past. Now, what that can mean is we can take a new concept like Gen AI, or a lot of focus in our report on folks looking at implementing things like ITDR. We can take that stuff, use it to make our existing programs more automated, more proactive versus reactive.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean that we have to switch everything over to this brand new model, right? What it means is we can take stock of what's out there, how it can get some sort of operational benefits. The word I use, and it always makes me think about mashed potatoes, is finding ways with this new stuff to simply be consistent in our security programs A lot of times as well, we might have something that's very bread and butter, like multi-factor, but have implemented it in a way that makes our end users so grumpy that if they're anything like I used to be back when I was a developer, it causes them to begin finding ways around our controls and building potential vulnerabilities, even though they don't know about it.
Yeah.
So even moving away from something like Gen AI, using a more modern strategy for multi-factor as an example, chances are the solutions you have already do it are a way to take advantage of the new stuff, right? The bright, shiny stuff to make foundational security better. So rambly story short, striking balance between the two. Don't not get excited, right? Again, new stuff is new. It's cool. It's great. But apply that to your existing controls to see where you can suss out new value.
All right. I have another note that I wrote down in our pre-call, which was Metallica concert example. Do you remember what this was?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I took this one from the person who leads up CyberArk's incident response team. And it must have been a year ago. At this point, he was at a Metallica concert. He's a Metallica fan. And he went there, right, knowing every single one of Metallica's deep cuts.
Okay. However,
the audience would have been totally happy if they had just gotten up there, wailed on Enter Sandman, and were done. Right? Very much like attackers, right? There are the deep cuts, right? There's the next level stuff. There's the stuff we get excited about as security practitioners. But there's also Enter Sandman. There's the tried and true attack path that still exists in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Would you say social engineering is the Enter Sandman of a lot of hacking attempts? It's the tried and true. We know it works, or the phishing email, that kind of.
It's the OG. Yeah. The weakest link in any security network or program is going to be the human, because we are these wonderful biomechanical beings based on trust. So that ain't changing anytime soon, at least from my perspective.
So here's, again, another great segue here is your survey showed that 52% of the companies said they've been attacked by ransomware at least 3 times, which is like, okay, I understand that, like that seems normal. But that 56% of them have paid to get their data back at least 3 times, which, isn't that just giving up at this point? Like, why are we even bothering discussing security if you're going to be paying for the ransomware? And on a recent show, we had a former Secret Service agent who investigated a lot of data breaches over the past 20 years. And, he was, I don't want to say he was offended, but he was like, why are these companies paying? Because there's no guarantee that they're going to get their data back. There's no guarantee that they're going to get, not hacked again. So why is this happening? Why do you see these numbers that 56% should be a lot lower, right?
It should be.
But why, what's your analysis?
So when we looked at the report, we didn't go much deeper here in this area in terms of exactly what is driving folks to have paid. I do like just starting with the 52% of companies that have been attacked 3 times. I imagine that these organizations are beginning to look at things like off-site, loosely connected network backups as an example, so that they can recover. If we look on a positive note, right, we are seeing cases where an organization who may have backups available, depending on the level of the attack, might say, okay, the opportunity cost of rebuilding from backup and establishing, say, new network trust, doing version control, having teams work on more stuff, if the backups happened a little bit further in the past, is the cost of that more than the cost of paying the ransom?
Yeah.
Traditionally, we would say, no, you should never pay the ransom. But if it means keeping your services up and available, if it means being able to use that resource capital for something else, the pragmatic decision might be to pay. But to your point, you do assume the risk that you may not get the data back at all. Right. And you are funding these threat actors that really should not.
Yeah,
there's a move towards pragmatism here.
Yeah, if I'm a hacker and I'm seeing that number, I'm going yippee! Like I'm like, yeah, I can't. People are more and more willing to pay. I'm going right after them, the people that I could scare into thinking that I'm going to take all their critical systems, and that's why you see hospitals, for example, getting hit a lot.
And I'll tell you. we've seen advancements,
Yeah.
right? We've seen organizations that are highly regulated closing, I'll call it the barn door, more than those organizations that might be more pragmatic. So you mentioned healthcare, right? That's human life. Manufacturing, again, it's another case where it's not just data or dollars we're dealing with. It's like people, as well as any, of course, of the pipeline, midstream, downstream companies that we're seeing too. In a lot of cases, when human life is on the line, these are going to be the organizations to get deeper into innovative technologies, backups, but weren't always that way. They were the ones thinking it could never happen to me. So there's been more visibility, but also more investment in prevention that starts with something as, I'll call it simple and straightforward, as backups.
Yeah. And you know, we do kind of try to end the show on an optimistic note, because you know, right now my question was, why do we think we don't need to hide in a hole somewhere? You are going to promise me some optimism here, and you know, Brandon, it seems like you're an optimistic guy, and you work for a security company, which is kind of an oxymoron because it feels like the security guys would be the most paranoid people in the world, and doom and gloom, and what's the term? I can't remember what it is, but you know, give me some optimism here. And you already did in when you were talking about companies that are asking their cloud providers, for example, for more proof of their trust. So what other areas do we have optimism around when you see a lot of this security bad news?
So in a lot of cases, and by the way, this is my most pessimistic that you'll see me generally, but one of the things that we found outside of visibility, which is key, right? You don't know that you have a problem until you hear about it. Now, it's your choice to do something, but in terms of the doing something where the clouds part and the sun shines through, is we found when asking that 87% of the organizations we talked to believe they were making good identity security related decisions. So they're feeling good about it. And even then, over half of them said, but good can be better. So folks have recognized that there's more work to be done here in terms of disparate identities, environments, new attack methods, that kind of thing. We also asked them, what technologies are you prioritizing? Like, what's going to help you become better? And generally, they said the same stuff. Proactive response, ITDR, the concept of zero standing privileges was like an evolution of least privilege, right? Can't compromise an identity that doesn't exist, and it only exists at the right level of permissioning. These are all strong concepts to help us get over the hump. So seeing organizations globally all align behind a relatively similar set of principles, that's pretty cool. Likewise, a lot of folks would align as well behind things like automation, additional governance, cloud awareness, and enriching solutions too. So again, we saw consensus, which hasn't always been the case. In the first iteration of the report, it was all over the place in terms of what folks were doing, what they were prioritizing. So anytime we see a consensus, to me, that is some of that optimism and hope that you were asking for. All
right, Brandon, great stuff. Again, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. And if you haven't gotten a chance to, just check out. We'll put a link in the bottom of the of where you can read the survey results. Some good stuff from the company. Thanks.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, add any thoughts you have below. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.